FYI, there's another movie that came out in 2015 called The Invitation, starring Logan Marshall Green. That is an excellent movie and I highly recommend everyone go watch it. The Invitation from 2022, however, not so much. Let's discuss. Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
Come on. Do it! Do it!
The Invitation 2022 follows a young woman played by Nathalie Emmanuel, who after her mother's death finds out she has distant relatives in England. And she goes to visit them only to discover that they are hiding some very dark secrets. If that synopsis sounds generic to you, it's because it is. I feel like I've reviewed about 100 movies this year that start with someone close to the main character dying. It just feels like every lead character, especially female lead characters, desperately need some kind of tragedy to push their story forward. Sometimes it's okay to throw a regular person into a fucked up situation and let them deal with it, especially when you're making a horror movie.
Game over, man! It's game over! What the fuck are we gonna do now?
Anyway, I'll start with some positives just so I can avoid that dreaded "you are too negative" narrative. I enjoyed Nathalie Emmanuel's performance. I think she came off very charming and likable, even if her character left a little bit to be desired. I like the gothic aesthetic of the film. I'm always a sucker for a well-constructed, creepy mansion atmosphere. Although I do think, based on what they are taking inspiration from, that they could have leaned into this idea a bit more. And that's going to be a theme in this review.
Put some effort into it!
I also did like the fact that this movie takes its time and really didn't rush into anything. It's rare in modern cinema to get a slow burn of sorts. It does take a while to set up everything in this movie. Some people may find that boring and that's understandable. I think a slower setup is great if the payoff makes it worth it. Unfortunately, that's where this movie fails, because the payoff doesn't feel satisfying based on how long it takes to build to it.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
And that's a real problem because it makes the audience feel like they just wasted their time, because they did. It's an underwhelming finale, to say the least. And it even has this kind of tacked on outro that feels like it doesn't belong in the movie at all. Either they added it after the fact because they felt like audiences needed more of a resolution, or they're keeping a possibility open that this story could continue, and I just can't fathom a situation where that would be true.
Never happened in the States. Never.
Either way, bottom line is that the ending was very anticlimactic. This film was originally titled The Bride and was under the watchful producing eye of Sam Raimi. And I would have much rather seen that film, frankly. Maybe Raimi could have injected some of his iconic style into some of these horror scenes, because they desperately needed something.
Groovy.
Instead, Raimi ended up leaving the project, and what we were left with was a pretty by-the-numbers standard horror movie. And again, I'm using that term horror loosely because it's not really scary in the slightest. What really sucks is I like the concept of this movie. I don't think this is a spoiler because it was basically revealed in the trailer, but this is kind of a reimagining of ideas introduced in Dracula. I do think there is a much better movie in here somewhere. It just needed a more visionary writer or director to make it stand out a bit more.
That makes sense.
This happens all the time in modern film, where it feels like they have an interesting take, but they seemingly take the easiest way out in bringing it to life, and that's kind of a shame, honestly. A lot of this movie, much to many people's surprise, plays out like a love story. And I do understand why the filmmakers took that route to an extent, but I think a little bit more time fleshing out the conflict rather than this relationship could have helped that long setup be a bit more digestible to audiences.
No shit.
In fact, the conflict is just kind of dropped in your lap, even though you do have an idea that something weird is going on. But it's in this moment that the movie kind of takes a left-hand turn. I will admit that that was probably my favorite scene in the whole movie, however. By the way, if they ever make a live-action Resident Evil story based on that big-breasted lady character that everyone was obsessed with a few years ago, there's definitely an actress in The Invitation that could play her because she looks pretty much just like her.
Tits. Hooah.
Not that I'm asking for another Resident Evil adaptation, because I think we've all suffered enough on that front. Overall, I feel like The Invitation features decent performances outside of one obnoxious side character. Unfortunately, its story had some potential, but ultimately succumbs to a lot of the same pitfalls that most modern films do. That being, the idea feels uninspired in its execution. The horror moments were underwhelming, the pacing was inconsistent to say the least, and I didn't feel much of anything watching The Invitation, and that's why I'm going to give it the Careless Sam Gerard.
I don't care!
Y'all be cool. Nah, nah.